Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, it's lambing season. I have gifts from viewers. I have a finally finished sweater project, and I have a work in progress where I use a tool that I never expected I would actually use. So let's get started. It's lambing season here in Minnesota, and I imagine a lot of other places as well. And in addition to being lambing season, last week was our Twin Cities area shop hop. Now, many of you who've been watching me for a while know that I'm not really a yarn stasher, but I do have an issue at the moment with buying fiber for spinning. I have more fiber than I can use. I could stop buying fiber and I would be fine for a few years. I saw that Teresa from Get Bents, she's the farmer who hosts A Year with the Sheep that I did last year. She has her own mini mill and she processes fiber in different ways. She does roving, she does bats, she does yarn, all kinds of things. So I saw that she had created some bats and that they were going to be available for sale at a particular yarn shop that I had never been to. It's called Muse 2320. And the woman who owns that shop, she's actually an independent dyer, and so the shop facilitates selling her yarn, but she was also going to be hosting Teresa during Shop Hop, and Teresa was going to be selling her yarn and her bats. And I was really interested in these bats that she had created. She had used Montana Targhee as the main wool for the bats, and then she used yarn scraps from Muse 2320's dyeing business as part of the bats. She incorporated those in there, and so it creates this kind of confetti look, and I was really interested in that. I ended up buying 2 bats because I wanted enough for a sweater. I think each of the bats is like 7.5 ounces, something like that. So if I unfold it, let's see, I don't know how well you can see, but there's these little pops of color all throughout there. And it's this big fluffy fleece. And like I said, it's Targhee. Now I always have to look up different breeds because I can never remember, especially the American ones, like how they were first created. So Targhee is like a lot of breeds, which is that it's created by crossing merino sheep. Well, actually, this was created using Rambouillet, which is French merino. So it's crossing Rambouillet with Corriedale and Lincoln. So Corriedale is a New Zealand breed that was created by crossing merino with Lincoln. So there are quite a few breeds that were created by crossing merino, which has that beautiful softness, with Lincoln, which is the longest of the long wools, and it's got a lot of luster and it's very strong. And so you can blend those together and you can get a yarn. You can breed in order to get a yarn that combines those 2 qualities and also creates a sheep that might do better in different climate conditions. Polwarth, which was developed in the rainy coastal Victoria area of Australia, had a problem with merino in that area because of the rain, and so they crossed the merino with the Lincoln in order to develop the Polwarth breed, which does much better in the rainy climate there. So these 2 breeds end up being crossed a lot. Rambouillet, like I said, is a French merino, and like Australian merino is different from Spanish merino because when the sheep are originally imported into these places that are far away, a lot of times they end up breeding them with other things initially until they get exactly the characteristics that they want. I bought this, but when I went to the shop hop, Teresa wasn't just there selling her wool. She had a bottle lamb with her. So this wasn't an orphan. A lot of times bottle lambs are orphans. This one was like the mother's milk just didn't come in. And so this one's name is Bingo, and Bingo is so cute. And these bottle lambs get so used to humans that they're very friendly. There was a brewery next door, and so there was also a brew and make with you event going on in conjunction with the shop hop. Teresa said, oh, well, when you get settled in the brewery, I'll bring Bingo over and then you can hold him and maybe he'll take a nap in your lap or something like that. She did bring him over, and that lamb got passed around like a baby gets passed around. It just, because it is a baby, but it's really cute. But I got a picture of me holding Bingo, so that was really fun. The lamb season isn't over for me yet. It is lamb season at Gale Woods Farm, where I volunteer. I'm a fiber volunteer. I do a lot of processing. It might be scouring, I might be carding, I might be, lately I've been carding wool and then dizzing it off of the carder to create roving that can be used or even sold in the shop. So I've been doing that lately. I was there last Thursday, just over a week ago, and the first lambs had been born the night before, like unexpectedly early. So before I left, Sherry, who coordinates the fiber volunteers, said, oh, do you want to see the new lambs before you leave? I'm like, oh my gosh, absolutely. So we went down to the barn, and not only did this ewe give birth the day before, but 3 other ewes had given birth as well. So there were already 11 lambs. There were 2 sets of twins, and then the ewe that gave birth first, she'd had 4, but only 3 survived. The 4th one had mucus over its nose. This is because nobody knew that she was going into labor, and the night before nobody had any idea. And then there was also sheep that had quints, and one of them was stillborn. So the one that had quints actually has quads. The one that had quads actually has triplets, and then there's 2 sets of twins. But those were early because they have a program called Lamb Watch, and it was meant to start a number of days after these first lambs were born. They think maybe because we had kind of some really warm, unseasonably warm times in April or in March, that kind of caused these ewes to go into labor earlier. But they have Lamb Watch, and volunteers can sign up to be on Lamb Watch for a night from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. And so you're looking out for signs that a ewe is in labor, and they kind of trained you in on what to look for. If they're bagging a lot, or if they're pacing around or lying down and getting up, you can kind of assume they're going to be in labor, and then you can move them into one of the little nursery pens. And then you watch for the signs that they're going to give birth, and if they don't give birth within a certain amount of time when you see those first signs, then you can call the farmer who he lives just a quarter mile down the road from the farm, and he'll come in and make sure that she's doing okay, see if she needs any help, that kind of thing. These are Finn sheep, so they have multiples. Each one is going to have at least 2, and might have up to 4 or 5. So then you kind of keep track of, okay, after the first one's born, is the second one progressing? And so you call for help if you need it. So I am signed up for Lamb Watch tonight, and I'm really excited about it. And I'm also a little nervous, but I'm not going to be there alone. The woman, Shelley, who first introduced me to Gale Woods and the volunteering thing there, she's going to be there, and her husband too. So there'll be 3 of us there. And if there are any bottle lambs, we'll be feeding them through the night as well. So I'll make sure to take pictures. But I did take a picture of the 3 little lambs that were born first. There's 2 white lambs, and then there's one that's black and white. So one of the things Shelley and I are doing, she got this whole booklet, it's like 20 pages long, that explains the different coloring, the names of the different types of coloring that Finn sheep can come in. And so, for example, there might be a black sheep that's totally black. If it has white anywhere on its head, socks, or tail, then it's a black HST. It doesn't have to have in all 3 of those places, but one of those. If it also has white somewhere else in the body, then it's a piebald. But if it's like mostly white with like little tiny black spots all over, then it's Dalmatian. So there's a lot of different names. And then there isn't just black and white, there's brown, and there's kind of a beigey color and gray, you know, and then there's diluted and not diluted like, oh, I'm crazy, diluted, but diluted. And then there's faded, and you know, there's just a whole bunch of different combinations. So we're going to try to see if we can figure those out and give us something to do when nobody's giving birth. But I hope I get to see some lambs being born and that all goes well with them tonight. And I will update you in the next Casual Friday to show you what happened that night. So right behind me, you can see a fair bit of my knitting library. You cannot see all of it. There is quite a bit of it over at that end of my office, within reach of my desk. And the books that I have over there are the ones that I use most often. So my general reference books and stitch dictionaries. So I love stitch dictionaries. I do design a fair amount of my own projects. And so I often consult stitch dictionaries because I don't really care much for knitting plain stockinette. So I really like stitch patterns, sometimes really complex cables, sometimes just an interesting knit purl pattern that can keep me engaged and not bored, but doesn't require a super duper amount of concentration. And one of the books that I turn to fairly often is a book called Sequence Knitting. It's by Cecelia Campochiaro, and it's a heavy book. It's hardbound, and it's got a library binding, so when you open it up, it will lay open flat. And I used this book a couple of months ago when I knit my first project that started from raw fleece, and then I spun it up. You know, I processed the fleece, I carded it, I spun it up, I dyed the yarn, and then I designed a sock pattern for that yarn. And one of my viewers said, oh, you should use a stitch pattern from Sequence Knitting. And I thought that was a really good idea. So I did that. So over the years, I have mentioned this book a number of times, and I have used it a number of times to design projects. I really like it. Well, recently, I think it was just like a week ago, I got a direct message from Cecelia saying some very lovely things. She said, oh, I'm a big fan of yours, have been for a long time, and I have a new book out, and I'd love to send it to you. Let me know if you like it. And she said, and if you don't have my second book, which is called Making Marls, M-A-R-L-S, I'll send you that one too if you're interested. And I was like, I am absolutely interested because they're stitch dictionary. Well, I don't know about Making Marls, but her brand new book, Reversible Knitting, is a stitch dictionary. This one has got a soft cover, but it has these like flaps so you can save a page. And I say it still like has a cover, like a dust cover for it, and you can. It's just nice. It's a really nice paperback. But what she did in Sequence Knitting was not just supply you with a bunch of stitch patterns, but tell you sort of the approach for designing that type of stitch pattern yourself. I thought it was really interesting. I spent, an afternoon going through this book, and there's some of the techniques I'm like, I'm going to have to really sit down and work through this to understand what it means. But even if you don't want to design something yourself, there's tons of stitch patterns in here. And they're reversible in that it isn't just that they look nice on both sides, it's that they look exactly the same on both sides. And I was thinking, well, how would you do that except for with basic knit purl? Like I couldn't quite imagine it. And she has so many different ways of doing things whether it's cables or lace or knit purl patterns or just all slip stitch patterns, all kinds of things. And it's really interesting. So I want to go to the overhead and show you a little bit about this. Now, I did mention the second book, and this one still has the shrink wrap on it. It's called Making Marls, and it's a way of working with multi-strand hand knitting. So carrying more than one strand of yarn at a time and shifting colors. With that, I have not opened it yet, but I just wanted to mention it, and I will go through it and I will talk about it in a future Casual Friday when I've had a chance to kind of digest that one. I'm still digesting this reversible knitting one, but I want to go to the overhead and just give you a little glimpse of what it looks like. And I'm so happy to add this to my very large collection of stitch dictionaries. I don't think you can have, well, maybe you can have too many stitch dictionaries. I can't have too many stitch dictionaries. It's really one of my favorite types of knitting books. As I said, this is a stitch dictionary, but she actually calls it a handbook and a stitch dictionary. And I think that's a good description of it because she does really explain how these types of patterns work for the different types. And she's got an overview. She's got the fundamentals, building blocks, explores the one row, stitch patterns that are foundation of reversible knitting, modifiers, investigates the two most powerful modifications that can be brought into reversible stitch patterns, fine striping and slip all over knit purl patterns, slip stitches, open work, things with holes in it, meshes, garter lace, lace ribs, and all over lace patterns, cables, includes mock cables, open mock cables, and true cables. And then deliberate distortions. And this is the one that I thought, what is she talking about? And I thought, oh, this is really interesting. So deliberate distortions are things like chevrons, which we're familiar with, which, you know, cause zigzagging. But she's also got this egg carton thing. So these really kind of three-dimensional things. And she's doing these in solid colors, but also in colors. And so you get this chevron, but then you get like the solid stripes with the stripes that have the blips. And so it's going to look the same on both sides. And then she's using a couple of different colors of Noro Curion, I think, which is always an interesting way to stripe things to get really interesting effects. And these really cool looking, like distorted looking checks. It's just kind of really cool. I really like these brooms here as well. And I just love that you could use these on a scarf or a blanket, something like that, and have it be really, truly reversible. It's just what I love about it. And then she's got some more of these egg carton things that are kind of three-dimensional. So here she's got some cables. And so you're doing cables on both sides. So in this purl background, it's actually a cable. So on the other side, it's going to look just like this. But then she does it in like a really finer yarn, but on the larger needles. That looks so cool. There's just so many interesting things in here. The lace things I thought were really interesting as well, where you've got this, you can see the holes in here, but then this one is in stockinette and this is in reverse stockinette. So again, if you flip it over, it's going to look the same. And then this is like the knit purl patterns, which is what I was thinking when she was talking about reversible patterns. This is just kind of what automatically came to my mind. You don't have to use them as reversible. You could also do it in something that was a sweater, that was a cardigan or open. It really had a large kind of hanging opening. And so if you saw the back side of it, it would look the same. That would be really interesting. At any rate, I love this. Even this, that's when you have your standard checkerboard thing, but then she puts some yarn overs in the corner with decreases, and it's like, oh my God, that just looks so cool. I love this. So thank you so much, Cecelia. I really love this. I haven't even broken the shrink wrap yet on Making Marls, but I promise I will be doing that in the next couple of weeks because this sounds really interesting to me as well. So 2 new books isn't the only thing that I was sent as a gift this week. The other thing was there's a viewer named Amber who lives, I believe she lives in Germany, and she has a friend who lives in Ohio and has had sheep and is working in a mill, and she's allowed to process her sheep's wool into roving in this mill. And Amber wanted to send me a gift and like help out her friend by buying some of her roving, but she wanted to send it to me as a gift. So I looked over what the choices were, and I picked this color. It's a wine color, and it's the sheep was a cross of Shetland, and then it said BL, which I assume is Border Leicester, and Finn. And Finn is the breed that I'm working with, the fiber at this Gale Woods farm where I'm a volunteer. So I was really interested in that. I loved the color. I was interested in that. There were 2-ounce balls, and I was happy to take, you know, any number of them that Amber wanted to send me. And she sent me all 7 that were available. So that's 14 ounces, and I think it's based on the sweater I'm wearing and how much wool I actually needed for this. This is enough for a sweater, presuming I don't have to rip out parts of it and start over. But even if I have to do that, then I would re-steam the yarn and use it. So I just started spinning this up. We had our monthly spinners group this Tuesday, and I started spinning it up so I can go to the overhead and kind of show you what it's looking like so far. I find that anytime I'm starting with a new set of wool, whether it's roving or comb top or whatever it is, it's often, you know, a different type of breed, or it was a different mill that processed it in a slightly different way, and it just takes a little while to kind of understand the wool and understand how it needs to be spun or how I need to spin it. And so that was what I was working on Tuesday. And so we'll go to the overhead and you can get a little view of what my singles are looking like so far. So this is what the 2-ounce ball looks like. It has a little bit of VM. I actually don't mind VM in my roving. It shows me that it has been minimally processed. The wool hasn't been run through an acid bath in order to destroy it all. A lot of it comes out when you're spinning the first time, and then when you're plying, it comes out. And if it seems like it's stuck, you can always stop your spinning and pull it out. But this is what the 2-ounce ball looks like. On my monitor, it's reading a little on the orangey side, but in my eyes, it's more of a blue or red side. I think it depends on the light and also the camera and monitors. So what it looks like on your screen, I don't know. So on my spinning wheel, I have blue fuzz here. So here you can see kind of what the single looks like, and there's a little bit of VM caught in here. So, you know, I was gradually able to get a finer single than what I was getting at the very start, which I'm happy about. I'm thinking I'll be able to use it as a 3-ply. I much prefer 3-ply. It's a rounder yarn. I just like a rounder yarn. And it also evens out the yarn more, because if you are a little thicker and thinner, but in all 3 plies, where it is kind of random, it kind of, everything averages out a little better. But I'll have to see, because with a woolen spun yarn, these things can really thicken after you wash them. They kind of blow up a little bit. So you'll think, oh, I've got a worsted weight yarn, and then you wash it. Nope, it's bulky weight. Or, oh, I've got a fingering weight yarn. Nope, it is sport or DK. I don't know at this point what I'm going to end up with. I'm pretty happy with what I got. At the beginning, I was like, oh, I couldn't quite figure out how to spin this. It wasn't going smoothly. And then after I'd been spinning for a bit, I was able to have more control over it. So that makes me happy. So if you have been following the saga of the sweater I'm wearing, you will see that it is finally finished, and I'm much happier with it than I was a year ago when I first completed it. I had made the shoulders too wide, and I wanted to re-knit the upper part of the body from the shoulders to the underarms. and then cut off the original and graft the new to the sweater below, because I was happy with the size of the sleeves and the body of the sweater. Just wasn't happy with the width of the shoulders. And even now, I think that, you know, the width is correct. It is top down and it's seamless. But the yarn is woolen spun. It's hand spun that I spun myself. And even though it's woolen spun and that's kind of self-supporting, because this is a cardigan and there's this opening in the front, I don't have the cardigan open, but it is, I feel like the neck can still want to move a little bit. And so I might do some reinforcement on the inside using a slip stitch crochet across the back of the neck and maybe even along the shoulder lines, just to keep it on my shoulders where I want it. But I'm much happier with this now. So I will put in a little clip of me wearing this so you can see what it looks like from all angles. And then I'll go to the overhead and I will show you a few of the details that I included in this sweater. I did not use a pattern in the sense of I didn't use a published pattern. I used my measurements and my gauge, and I decided the sizing, and I used the construction method for simultaneous set-in sleeves that were knit top down, and I just did the numbers for that and figured things out that way. I also dyed the green yarn. I used a color, it was called teal. It was from Mother Mackenzie's dye kit. Judith Mackenzie, who's nationally or internationally known spinning teacher. It's her dye kit. And I used the teal color, and then I used different dilutions of it to get 5 different shades. It reads a little bit more like 3 different shades, but there are 5 different shades. But we will go to the overhead and I'll show you some of the elements that I included in the sweater. And then if those are things that are interesting to you, I'll let you know down in the show notes, videos that I have that can demonstrate how to do those particular techniques. So let's go to the overhead. So one of the things that I wanted to incorporate into this sweater, because I always like doing new things, and it wasn't enough to spin all the yarn for this sweater and dye it, but I wanted to use some new knitting techniques. And I liked the idea of this kind of fold over collar. The other thing that I wanted to try was what's called a double pickup. So normally you'd see like a cast on or a bind off edge along the neckline, and then when you pick up from the right side of the fabric, and then on the inside you'll see kind of that bind off chain or cast on edge running along the edge here. So it, looks like the inside of a garment. But what this cast on does is that it has you pick up the stitches with a much larger needle than you're going to be using elsewhere. You pick up from the right side, and then you're working a couple of rows. And then on the wrong side of the work, because you're now using the smaller needle, that initial pickup row is really large stitches. And so you have the little purl bump on the back side that you use your thinner needle to pick up those loops onto your needle, and then you work them back and forth. So you have several rows of stockinette on this side and this side that are covering up that edge. And then you work your way into the ribbing. So that was something that I wanted to try. And it's a technique that's similar to how you can do a zipper facing as well, if you're doing like a cardigan that has a zipper going all the way down. So I used this double pickup. First I did the button bands. Then after the button bands were done, I picked up halfway across the top of this edge. And that way, when this is buttoned, the two collars are not overlapping. They're just right next to each other. Because I was going to have this double pickup here, I also wanted, the edge to be in the dark color as well, to kind of create a stripe going down this way vertically that resembled the ones that went horizontal. So I used another trick on that when I switched colors, which puts all of the blips on the back of the work. Because normally if you are maintaining your ribbing pattern and you switch to another color, you're going to get those little blips in those columns of pearls, and I wanted to avoid that. And the way that you avoid that is that when you switch to the other color in that first row with the new color, you work just in stockinette on the right side of the work, so that the gray stitches that were on the needle, as they're coming off the needle, those came off in stockinette. And then the teal ones were on the needle, the new stitches were on the needle. And then the next row, then I could resume the ribbing pattern. And because what you end up here is with, a row of garter stitch, the knits in garter stitch will recede while the pearls come forward. And so those knits recede, and you can't tell that those are knit stitches unless I point that out to you and you get really close to it. So that was a trick I used on all of the edges. So with the collar, you have to think about the fact that this is the right side of the sweater, but it's going to be the wrong side of the collar because the collar is going to be flipped like that. So that's one of those things where I was constantly, am I doing it this way or that way? The other thing for this kind of collar that I thought was interesting, when I switched from this double pickup where I had basically 2 layers of stockinette, on the button band, what you would do as you switch to the ribbing is that you would knit the 2 stitches together on the front and the back needle, knit these 2 together on the front and the back needle, and then you'd purl these 2 and purl these 2, so that you were joining them together, and you would maintain the stitch count that you had for each one of those halves. So if I had 90 stitches on each one of these, I'd still end up with 90 stitches. But for the collar, in order to add fullness to it so that it would roll over and lay nicely, as those 2 layers are being worked together, you just did knit 2 together, the first few stitches, were knit 2 together, and then you just started alternating where you would go knit 2 together, then you'd knit this one, purl this one, purl these 2 together, knit these 2 together, and then you'd again do knit this one, purl this one, so that you were actually increasing as you were going around, and then that would give it the fullness that you needed for this collar to actually roll over and lay nicely. So this technique, this double pickup and the collar, were from a book that I really like. It's called Big Book of Knitting. It's by Katharina Buss. It was published years ago. I got it, I think, when I first started the Master Hand Knitting program, which is 20 years ago now. It talks about the double pickup. It shows this type of collar. They're not using contrast color, but they're explaining, how to use this technique in these types of garments. And I love, this is also the book where years ago when I was really fed up with wrap and turn short rows, and I was trying to find a method of short rows that I could easily execute, reliably execute, that I liked the result of, that I could remember, all of that kind of thing. I took out all my books and looked in all of them to see, how they were explaining different short row techniques, and if any of them had some nice tips, because books will have the same technique but not necessarily explain it the same way. And I really hated wrap and turn short rows. All my books, that's what they had, and they were American or British books, wrap and turn short rows. This book, not English or American, is translated from German. It had 2 methods of short rows. And one of them was called shortened rows with yarn over. And I thought, okay, that's what I know as a yarn over short row. I knew that technique, only slightly less irritating than wrap and turn. And then there was this one, shortened rows with stitches passed over. And I didn't know what that was. And I was looking, and they had lots of pictures, lots of examples. And I worked through it, and I loved it. And I was pretty sure it gave the same result as Japanese short rows. This is a big mouthful. I could not find this technique anywhere else. And I did a video on it. I called it German short rows, and I wrote an article. It was in the last edition of This Week in Ravelry. They used to have this newsletter on the front page, and I had a column called Ask a Knitter, and I would answer technical questions. And so this was in my last column. I talked about this short row technique. And because it was translated from German, but this is too big of a mouthful and I couldn't find it anywhere, I just called it German short rows. So that's where the German short rows got its name from, is from me trying to come up with a different way of saying this and trying to evangelize this technique, because I thought it was so much easier than other techniques. But this book is full of fantastic techniques that you just don't see in other books, or at least I haven't seen much in other books. Fantastic. So what else did I do in this? I used double yarn over buttonholes because I had a knit two, purl two. I wanted the buttonholes to be in a purl column, and so I would do a knit stitch, and then I would do a decrease that eliminated the first purl stitch, do the double yarn over, and then do a decrease that eliminated the second one. So you have like a SSK here and a knit two together here. So I have a video on this technique. The other thing that I did in this is that one of the things I do not like is when you see like the button band has like a scalloped edge, and that can happen for a couple of reasons. One is if the cardigan is tight across the bust, and then it's really form-fitting and it pulls. That's one reason. Another reason could be that the buttons are heavy and the sweater is hanging. There's a lot of drape in the fabric, and it just, things pull. But the other reason can be if you are sewing your buttons right against the fabric, and then you're having to squish this other piece of fabric in between it. That can cause it to squish and then push the fabric out. So I use a technique that, if the buttons don't have shanks on them, I create a thread shank while I'm knitting with it. And you need a spacer for it. Some people will say, oh, I always use a matchstick. I don't use the same spacer for every garment unless I'm always using the same yarn weight. So I will use a knitting needle that is close to the same size that I used for the fabric. I think in this case I ended up using one that was maybe a couple of sizes smaller. I used a US 6, which is 4 millimeters, and then maybe I used a US 4, which I think is 3.5 millimeters for the spacer. So you are sewing over the needle, and then once you have sewn enough, you pull that needle out and you pull the tension out of the loop so that you have all of this space here, and then you wrap the remaining thread around there to create this shank so that this sits above the surface, and then there's room for the other piece of fabric under there. I have a video on this technique. I have videos on the double yarn overs. I have a video on the thread shank. I have a video on how to avoid blips in your color when you're switching colors, when you're working with knit purl patterns. So I have videos on all of those techniques that I will leave down in the show notes. I had a couple other things I want to mention about the sweater. The yarn is handspun. This is my first handspun sweater. I did not start with raw fleece. I started with prepared roving from Get Bents. So Teresa Bents, she's a local mini mill down in Northfield. It's about 45 minutes south of here in the Twin Cities. She sells her wool and also yarn at different farmers markets. She's got a CSA, which here in the United States, it's like a community something agriculture. I don't know. It's a way of supporting local farmers. agricultural goods. You can get a subscription over the summer for produce or whatever, and wool is an agricultural product, and so she has a CSA for that. This particular roving that I use is called WAM, Wool Alpaca Mohair. It's a blend that she does. She does it in a gray, and I think she also does it in like a natural cream color as well. I really loved spinning with it when I first got it. It's like I had a couple of braids. I spun it up. I got exactly the yarn I wanted for the very first time. So I bought more and more braids and then spun up what I thought was a sweater quantity, but was a lot more than a sweater quantity of yarn. And therefore I have more roving and more yarn left over. And I also have a lot of what I ripped out in order to reknit the top. In order to attach the new top, I'd had to rip out the button bands and the collar. And so, you know, I got a bunch of this. I can rewind this onto a nitty knotty to get a skein and steam it out, and I can reuse it. I just didn't want to do that when I was finishing the sweater. I had plenty of remaining yarn, and I still have a little bit of the top remaining. I had cut off more than this, but I needed to extract some of the stripes because I didn't have enough of the dyed yarn in order to complete the stripes that are closest to the underarm. So I still have this, and I can still unwind this as well. And I still have at least one more skein of yarn, and I've got a braid or two left as well. So I think I have enough to knit another sweater potentially in the future. But I'll leave information about Get Bents down in the show notes as well. So a few weeks back when I restarted this sweater, at the same time I started a brand new sweater, and I showed you how they were different construction methods. They were both top-down seamless constructions, both have set-in sleeves, but they're different construction methods. This one is called simultaneous set-in sleeves, and this other one has what are called contiguous set-in sleeves. And so I've been working on it. I'm actually got the body done, and I've got half of it bound off. It's a type of sewn bind up. It's a tubular bind up, but it's for twisted rib. And it's woolen spun yarn held together with another yarn, so it's kind of sticky. So it's a little slow going. I had hoped to have that bind up actually done before I started filming Casual Friday, but that didn't happen. But it is a sticky yarn situation, so the knitting, it just goes a little slower than it would if it was a worsted spun yarn, a smoother yarn, like especially if it was a superwash. Those are so smooth, it doesn't stick together, and the knitting just goes faster. One of the issues that I was having was that because I was working with, this is Brooklyn Tweed Loft, so it's a woolen spun 2-ply fingering weight, and then I'm working with this yarn, which I keep forgetting what it's called. I'll put it on the screen, but it's a baby alpaca cashmere silk blend. So instead of using a silk mohair, I was using this instead. And what happens is, you know, they don't weigh very much. And when I was getting a good way through the center pole ball or a good way through this, they were just flying all over my desk. Because normally I can have a yarn cake like this, and it will just sit on my desk, and it will just, I'll work from the inside out, and then when there's just a few yards left, it, you know, will collapse on my desk, and I can just keep using it. And because I'm just sitting at my desk, I'm not moving it around a lot, it's not a problem for me. But because this yarn is sticky, and it was getting to the point where it was weighing very much, it was flying around, and I thought, oh, I have a little notion or tool for this that I have never used for its intended purpose, and that is a yarn bowl. This is a yarn bowl that my sister-in-law gave me one year, and it's beautiful. It's metal, it's heavy. I don't ever use yarn bowls, and so this is usually, it's got a few things in here. Most of the things I took out. A lot of times I'll keep a little ball of bright colored fingering weight yarn, just a tiny couple of balls in there that I use if I need to put stitches on hold. Like I have stitches on hold right here. So that yellow ball of yarn is normally sitting in that bowl. So I took most of that stuff out, and then both balls won't fit in this, but this alpaca one does. And then, you know, I run it through the little hole, and this can just sit behind it, and I run the yarn through, through the little slot there. And that has been so helpful to me. So it's just interesting. A lot of times I'll try things out, or like I received this as a gift, but most of the time it's like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what that tool is like, and I'll buy it and I'm like, this is nothing that I will ever use, but I keep it because you never know. And in this case, I kept it and was using it not for its intended purpose, but once I did need it, I'm really glad I had it. For those of you who have yarn bowls and love them, do you use them for all yarns, or do you just use them for those sticky yarns? Because I just don't see any need for them most of the time, but this is a case where it really came in handy, to the point where I was like, ooh, maybe I could get another yarn bowl. I don't need another yarn bowl. I have this one and I've had it for at least 10 years. And this is the first time I've ever used it as a yarn bowl. So let me know if you've used these or what you think of them, or how you handle these sticky yarns and what do you do to keep them under control. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video, or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.